Hello and welcome. How is Sri Lanka dealing with its bitter ethnic divisions 1 year after the army won a brutal civil war against the Tamil Tiger rebels? Thousands of internally displaced Tamils are struggling to rebuild their lives after decades of fighting. The conflict began in 1983 when the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, also known as the LTTE, led an armed rebellion to establish a separate Tamil state in Sri Lanka. Well, Tamil nationalists said their struggle was a response to years of discrimination by the majority Sinhalese community. Still, the war ravaged Sri Lanka's economy and infrastructure and killed at least 80,000 people. The LTTE's violent methods, including the use of child soldiers and suicide bombings, prompted more than 30 countries to label it a terrorist organization. But the Sri Lankan government has also been accused of violations. Human rights groups say its army may have killed thousands of civilians during its final push against the Tamil Tigers in 2009. And UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is considering setting up a panel of experts to examine Sri Lanka's human rights accountability. But today we ask, how will Sri Lanka address the growing chorus of war crimes accusations, and what chance is there of national reconciliation? We take your questions and comments through SMS or email on the show. Well, I'm joined in the studio by Sri Lanka's Foreign Minister, Gamini Lakshman-Peris. His government has stepped up pressure against UN efforts to set up a war crimes panel. Sir, I welcome you to the program. Thanks for being with us. You said there is, to quote you, no legal or moral justification for a possible UN inquiry into the war. Now, of course, if the Sri Lankan army has nothing to hide, then why not go ahead and just get it over with?
Because it would be a very unsound precedent, and our position, we take allegations seriously. Allegations relating to the violation of human rights, and we have set up an effective, credible mechanism in our country. Indeed, the call by the Secretary General of the United Nations when he visited Colombo last year in May 2009 was that Sri Lanka should set up an adequate mechanism to deal with this issue. That's what he asked for.
But Minister, I think your commission, the plan to have a commission, is to look at the last 7 years, the final 7 years of the conflict, and a lot of the critics say that's basically an effort to deflect any attention on the real issues, underlying issues.
No, I think there's a misunderstanding about that. Now, many people seem to think that the commission does not have legal authority to examine allegations in order to decide whether there is credible evidence that human rights violations have been committed. But in actual fact, the terms of reference refer directly to the authority of the Commission to determine whether any individual or group of individuals directly or indirectly bears responsibility for such violations. It is there in the terms of reference. And the period is stipulated. It begins on the 22nd of February 2002 when the ceasefire agreement was signed with the Tamil Tigers, and it continues until the 19th of May 2009 when the hostilities ended with the defeat of the LTT. But this particular element, that the fact that the Commission has this authority is not a matter of implication, not inference, but it is there in black and white.
Of course, people always question whether or not something that's internal can be truly free and fair. But let me ask you this in response to, well, let's look at who's pointing the finger. We have the Brussels-based International Crisis Group has blamed both the LTTE and the Sri Lankan army for human rights abuses. But here's what it said about the Sri Lankan security forces, and I'll quote this to you, sir. Yes. Crisis Group possesses credible evidence that it is sufficient to warrant an independent international investigation of the following allegations: the intentional shelling of civilians, the intentional shelling of hospitals, the intentional shelling of humanitarian operations, and says that there are 30,000 civilians unaccounted for. And Human Rights Watch also says the same thing. So you've got two fairly respected international groups putting some fairly serious allegations forward.
Yeah, but the whole procedure that they followed is, I think, flawed and basically unfair, because before they put out the report, they wrote to us. And they said, we have material in our possession which indicates exactly what you said, that the government and the LTT have both committed these violations. They then told the government of Sri Lanka that if we wish to say anything on the subject, we should respond to them before 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 30th of April, something like that. Now, how can we respond without knowing what is the source of these allegations? If you look at the report, there is no attribution of any of this to an identifiable source. We think that is wrong. If we are to respond, we must know who is making these allegations, on what basis. But the modus operandi has been to tell a story. The following things happened. It is stated as a fact. Now, in fairness to the Americans, there was a similar report which was prepared here in Washington, and there I refer to the report by Senator John Kerry, Senator Edward Lugar. Then the State Department also prepared the report. Now, they are very careful to say these are not allegations that we are making. This is material that has been put at our disposal by third parties. We are therefore stating it for what it is worth without in any way accepting responsibility ourselves for the accuracy of what is said. Now, that caveat is conspicuously lacking in the case of the ICG report, and all these allegations have been in the public domain for a long, long time. There's no fresh material at all.
Now, just I guess for the record, do you accept that there were actual human rights atrocities committed by the Sri Lankan army in the process?
No, we don't. We would like to be presented with the evidence. We would like to know who is stating all of this. And in any case, now we have appointed a commission with full power to investigate. We have not said that we propose to do nothing about it.
What I mean by, you accept that there have been allegations, Minister, but I'm wondering, do you accept that there is probably crimes committed?
No, we don't accept that at all. We reject that absolutely. We see a lot of this as propaganda. Look at the timing. Now, this event took place in London on the 17th of this month, right? Then 2 days later, Amnesty International did something similar. All of this is literally on the eve of a critical discussion in Brussels about a series of trade concessions which are of some importance to Sri Lanka. I refer to the GSP plus concessions. Now, those discussions were taking place in Brussels on the 20th and the 21st. There is something very strange about the timing of all of these things. These are out there in the public domain. They're suddenly resurrected, given the highest possible profile, and all of it coincides, not necessarily coincidentally, with some other event that is taking place at that time, which is of some importance to the economy of Sri Lanka.
Now, of course, so you're here in the US and you're looking to improve relations at a business level. You have other things on your agenda. But let me ask you to address one issue that the US State Department spokesman P.J. Crowley said. He urged your government to pursue what he calls a healing process.
Yes.
And of course, there are many who feel that unless you go through a comprehensive investigation and reconciliation, a truth and reconciliation process, that it's impossible to heal what is obviously a fractured country.
But that's exactly what we are doing. What I urged the Secretary General of the United Nations when I met him on Monday is that the commission which has been appointed in Sri Lanka, consisting of people with impeccable antecedents, established reputations, they're not friends or agents of the government. The terms of reference enable them to address these issues in earnest, that this commission must be given the space to do its work. And it would be quite wrong for anybody to begin on the premise that this is not going to work, to attribute mala fides to a commission that is appointed by a sovereign government. That's not right. Let the commission do its work. If there are shortcomings or deficiencies that surface, then by all means we are not averse to entering into a dialogue with the United Nations system about ways and means how they could help.
So a follow-up is possible, assuming there is some issue?
No, let the commission start and let's look at what is happening on the ground. But at the very start, for them to impose themselves when we haven't asked for it, I think that is wrong. It will only stultify the work of the commission, make it more difficult than it needs to be, and understandably there would be a resentment in the country about this very condescending, patronizing attitude, which we think is entirely out of place.
What do you, sir, what do you think is the agenda the UN has in insisting, or at least calling very strongly for this kind of investigation? What agenda do you think the UN has?
It is quite evident that there is enormous pressure on the UN system coming from people with agendas of their own.
For example?
Well, the agenda basically, quite frankly, is to make things as difficult as possible for a country that is trying to build up its economy after 2 decades of painful conflict. You see, one must not forget that the LTT has been militarily defeated in Sri Lanka, but they still have the vast resources which they have accumulated over a quarter of a century, financial resources. They also have a very sophisticated communications network. Now, what they are engaging in is an economic onslaught against Sri Lanka.
I'm wondering who benefits in terms of like having the UN put pressure on you, having these human rights groups and international organizations. Who benefits from effectively putting you under this kind of pressure?
Well, I mean, groups that are friendly to the LTT are very active in these capitals.
The LTT has been labelled terrorist organizations by so many other countries.
That is so, but there are groups friendly to the LTT, carrying out their agenda tortuously, indirectly. And these people are putting pressure on politicians, aides of politicians. They have infiltrated many of these setups. That's a fact. It is known.
You meet with the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the end of the week, and I wonder what you're expecting in terms of the way discussions will go there. What sort of pressures do you expect from her?
No, I don't expect to encounter pressure in that sense. We would like to inform her of the very positive developments which are taking place in my country. With regard to internally displaced people, we have resettled 80% of them. We are rebuilding the economy of those parts of the country. We have revived the electoral process. We are holding elections that could not be held for a long period, local government elections, because of the violence there. And one thing in particular that I would like to suggest to the Secretary of State, and we have taken that up at many of the meetings that we had with congressmen, with senators and so on, is that the time has probably come to broaden the scope of the relationship between Sri Lanka and the United States. No, we are not objecting to a focus on human rights. That's okay. We have a story to tell, but we don't think it should be the sole and exclusive focus. Let's talk about other things as well. How the United States can involve itself in the rebuilding of our country, the rebuilding of infrastructure in particular.
Do you expect a receptive ear from the Secretary of State?
I don't think so, certainly.
Minister, I want to ask you more about what's happening in your country in a second. Now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll ask the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister if his country can risk another violent outbreak of Tamil nationalism. Don't go away. Welcome back. As Sri Lanka struggles to move forward 1 year after the end of a decades-long civil war, the Sri Lankan army's conduct against Tamil rebels is being called into question. Human rights groups are calling for a UN war crimes inquiry, but Sri Lanka says such a panel will be counterproductive to the peace process. I'm discussing these issues with Sri Lanka's Foreign Minister, Gamini Lakshman Peris. And sir, we were talking about your visit here, but let me ask you a little bit about what's happening in your country now. First of all, are you convinced that the war is over? Are you convinced that the Tamil Tigers, the LTTE, has been defeated and that there is perhaps no more move towards a separatist homeland?
Oh, yes. As far as military action is concerned, it's over. There's no way that the LTTE can rearm and regroup and start a military campaign again. That belongs to the past. However, the government of Sri Lanka does not for a moment believe that a military victory per se is going to present us with a final solution to this problem. And that is why President Mahinda Rajapaksa of Sri Lanka is quite clear that he wishes to move towards a political resolution as well. That is essential. And the government has already started informal discussions with the Tamil leadership in the country, right, to find out what their views are. They must feed their insights into the process, and we are trying to build up a consensus in the country to make the political solutions implementable. So the political initiatives are essential, they're complementary to what has already been achieved, and we are very much in earnest about putting in place a political solution within a unitary state that would be fair and equitable by all the communities that live in the country.
Of course, presumably that's a difficult prospect while you still have thousands of the Tamils languishing in camps, many of them in sort of lockdown mode. What's being done to rehabilitate them into society and deal with their issues?
Yeah, but there, I think we have to give the country credit for what has been achieved. 80% of internally displaced people have already been resettled. We started with a staggering figure of 297,000, right? And it's a situation that we were not well equipped to deal with. This happened unexpectedly, but right now, as we speak, 80% of them have been resettled. And not just physically resettled, but it has been important to us to ensure that they have adequate incomes, restoration of livelihoods, so that they can live their lives with a sense of dignity. What you said earlier, there must be no resurgence of these problems. These are problems in the hearts and minds of people, and that is so 80%. One has to concede that for a small country like Sri Lanka to have done. There are countries which 10 years after, 15 years after conflict of this nature are still struggling with the multifaceted problems of resettlement, but we have achieved all of this within the short space of less than 1 year.
Of course, you have many people saying that there's a huge demand for death certificates for many of those killed, and the government isn't releasing those. Those are obviously crucial for on many angles for the people involved, the relatives involved. Why isn't the government moving?
No.
Some believe obviously this is trying to keep the civil death casualty, death toll, very small.
No, that's not the case. You know, one has to recognize the magnitude of some of these problems, the logistics. You know, the fact of the matter is that 1 year has elapsed since the war came to an end. Now look at other conflict situations. How long have they taken to deal with these excruciatingly painful and difficult issues? So everything is relative. You know, one has to examine the context. In 1 year, I think we have done an enormous amount. If there are issues about death certificates, no, those are all matters well within the scope of the commission that has been appointed in Sri Lanka a couple of weeks ago. All of that can be taken up.
Now, of course, if you are trying to have some kind of reconciliation process, there's the issue of the celebration or the sort of commemoration of the 1 year anniversary of the war, which where there are tributes to those who died in the conflict. Now, reports say that Tamils in the north are not allowed to hold their religious ceremonies in a temple to mourn their dead. When the Media and Information Minister was asked about it, he said, though the Tamil people have a right to privately commemorate their kith and kin, they cannot be allowed under the pretext to make it a campaign to start again divisive politics. But of course, it looks like we can celebrate or we can take a certain view on this anniversary, but you can't.
No, I don't agree with that, because one has to recognize there are different points of view among the members of the Tamil community. One must not forget that the LTT has killed as many Tamils as they have killed Sinhalese. So there are people in the north who feel very, very strongly, members of the Tamil community, they welcome what has happened. They have been liberated from a regime of unmitigated oppression, because that's what it was. You know? Towards the end, every family was asked to give two of their sons about the age of, I think it was about 13 or 14. So this assumption that the Tamil people are unhappy about the defeat of the LTT is totally wrong. The vast majority of Tamil people did not want to live under the yoke of the LTT. So then this talk of the Tamils wanting to commiserate, that's not the case. And the vast majority, I assert with every confidence that the vast majority of Tamil people who live in the north are happy about the freedom which has at last come to them. And certainly they are in a mood to celebrate that mood of freedom.
Now, of course, the tactics of the LTT and the extremist tactics have been well documented. But I wonder, have you managed to see, or have you been presented with the evidence the UN has authenticated showing Tamils being shot point blank by soldiers, by the Sri Lankan military?
No, that is this controversy about the Channel 4. Now, we have rejected that totally. Now, this has surfaced recently. This was part of the campaign which surfaced in London a few days ago. What I referred to, that is first the International Crisis Group, then Amnesty International, then Human Rights Watch. But again, there's nothing new at all. What has been exposed during the last few days is exactly what was in the public domain for a long, long time. So we have questioned the authenticity of the tape. Where was it made? Is there any evidence relating to that? All these issues remain unexplained, furtive. So we see these as very emotive propaganda ploys which are being employed at times which are crucial for Sri Lanka from the point of view of other discussions, developments, decisions. When something is being done which is good for Sri Lanka, which will strengthen Sri Lanka's economy, whether it is an IMF tranche, or whether it is a trade concession from Western Europe, or whether it is a decision by the Secretary General of the United Nations regarding a course of action that he should or should not pursue. These are the times that are chosen by these people to re-agitate in public matters which have been out there for very long periods without any fresh evidence being adduced in any manner whatsoever.
Minister, what clear measures have been taken within Sri Lanka itself to address what has been seen as an imbalance in the treatment of the Sinhalese compared with the Tamils? What is legislated now to make sure the community is more integrated and there is equality?
Well, lots of things are being done. I'll take, for example, the recruitment of members of the police force in the eastern province and in the north. Very large numbers have been taken. But then you must concede that some time ago, when there was all this violence, that would not have been feasible. So a lot of things have changed with the situation returning to normal, and the numbers of Tamil-speaking persons recruited in the police have increased. Then administrative measures, the conduct of proceedings in courthouses, correspondence with members of the Tamil community who address government departments in their own language, all of this is happening today. Very soon after the eradication of terrorism.
Let me put two emails quickly to you, sir, that came in from our viewers. One from Rashid Chowdhury in Canada. I'll put them back to back. This one says, will Sri Lanka consider federalization as a means of meeting the aspirations of Sri Lankan Tamils? And on a similar note, Selvaraja Somaya from Malaysia wrote in saying, the Tamils must now be given greater autonomy. There must be a radical change in the constitution to bring about unity. Do you think it's that?
Yes, today we have a government in power after a quarter of a century which has the legal competence to change the constitution. Since 1977, we haven't had a government in Sri Lanka which had a two-thirds majority in parliament. The present government has it. Now, it's an opportunity that we must use. As for federalism, we don't think that labels are important. The President of Sri Lanka, the government, has made it very clear that any solution that is arrived at must be within the framework of the unitary state, because that is the mandate which the President received from the people of our country. But within that framework, there's a lot that can be done. That's what we propose to do. I don't think we should be captured by nomenclature, by labels. What is unitary, what is federal, where does one stop, where does the other end, you know? So that's not the way to set about it. Let's do something of a practical nature which is suited to the conditions of the country.
A very quick thought, an email that came from Azizur Rahman, who says, it seems international humanitarian law hits developing countries such as Sri Lanka the worst. This is probably because of Western dominance in international organizations. Just a one-line thought, sir. Do you expect the pressure from these international organizations like ICG and Human Rights Watch to ease, or is it going to be an ongoing battle?
No. Quite frankly, I think they're going to step up the pressure. They have objectives of their own. These are not reflected by the majority of states, but we don't, well, the pressure will be stepped up, but we are prepared to respond to that.
Minister, I thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on topics and post your questions and comments. On the next show, we speak with the former Afghan Foreign Minister and presidential candidate Abdullah Abdullah about where things stand in his country and what's next for him. That's it from me and the team. Join us for the next one. I'll see you next time.
Authenticating.